So hi everyone, good evening. My name is Teresa Marston. I'm the Director of Communications for Great Valley School District. Thank you for attending this event. So the district has been hosting this speaker series with Be a Part of the Conversation this past year. And tonight we have Kim Porter with us, the Executive Director. So I'll turn it over to Kim so she can get started on this night's session. Thanks, Kim.
Again, Great Valley is truly a wonderful school district. And if you're not from Great Valley and you're joining us, you're welcome absolutely as well. But we love working with Great Valley and very grateful. And Teresa this is our first time working together. So looking forward to getting to know you better. So thank you very much to the district for being such a wonderful partner. I think this is like our 7th year or something like that, partnering with the district. So really appreciate that. There's a follow-up page on our website. Our website is conversation.zone, and the page that is specific to this topic is /vaping. So that's where you can find a lot of details, and I'll share that again at the end. I'll share a lot of links in the chat, actually, that I'll be mentioning here. We have other programs coming up. This is our final program this year with Great Valley School District, but we have lots of other programs coming up that you're, of course, welcome to join. Some of them are in person, and some are on Zoom, but you can find all of those on our calendar. We have a YouTube channel that has more than 190 programs recorded, so you can check that out and take a deeper dive into some of the topics that you'd like to learn more about. I also like to let you know about a couple of services that we have. All of our services and programs are completely free, but this is something called Parent Partnership. As you'll learn in just a minute, I have a loved one two loved ones who are in recovery. The one that kind of brought me into this work is my son, and I really benefited tremendously from these Parent Partnership meetings that are under our umbrella. We have 21 meetings every week. Half of them are on Zoom and half in person. So the purple buttons are the in-person meetings. You click on those and you find the location. The Zoom links are on the green buttons. Those are the online meetings. So there's no need to register or anything like that. Just totally free to attend.
Okay, so we have.
I can remind folks to please mute yourselves. That would be great. Thank you. Okay. So we also have a family recovery course, and this is not prevention. Tonight's program is kind of in the prevention lane. This is a course that we developed 4 years ago called the Family Recovery Course that is for parents, guardians, grandparents who have a child of any age who has struggled with substance use. And so this is a free resource. It's capped at 12 individuals, so it's nice and intimate. It's led by 2 instructors who have lived experience. I'm one of 18 instructors, and we love working with families. We know it's a tough time for them, for those who are going through this, but we've been there, so we do understand it. So that leads me to why this is important to me. I just mentioned that I do have a son who is in recovery today, thank goodness. But thank goodness too that he lets me show this picture of him. He's 36 years old now, but this is when he was 14 years old. He doesn't normally wear a bow tie when he goes out for ice cream, but he was in the jazz ensemble in middle school. So this was after a concert, and that's his sister and his dad. And we went out to Baskin Robbins, and super wholesome. And the reason I like showing this picture is it's still shocking to me that the first time Daniel got high was a year before this photo was taken, when he was 13 years old. That is not terribly unusual. It's not that every 13-year-old is out there trying substances, but for the folks who are interested in, who go on to develop problems with substance use, a lot of them started when they were young teens. And so, and the friend of his who helped him get high for the first time and got him the weed was 12 years old. And so this is not that unusual. It's really shocking though. And his dad and I were honestly quite clueless until years later, when it started to become a problem for our son. Really, the first time we knew, he was 18 years old. And I'm happy to talk about that more. I know I often get questions at the end of my presentation, like, all right, how did you miss this? And I can talk more about that. But we ended up doing an intervention when he was 21 years old. And thank goodness he agreed to go to treatment. And just a week ago, I guess it was March 13th, he celebrated 15 years in recovery. This is my son now on the left with his lovely wife, Chloe, and that's me out there visiting them in Boulder, Colorado. Well, that was actually Denver, but we were together at the holidays and it was great. And he's doing beautifully. So thank goodness. But boy, did I have a lot to learn. I wish I knew then what I know now, because I was not in this field all those years ago when we were going through this with Daniel's use. We know that if parents are educated about this, their kids are 50% less likely to misuse substances. So, as I said, you are wonderful parents for being here, and kudos to you for caring so much about having, these kind of healthy conversations with your kids and how you can best support them. We know that if we start using a substance before we're 18 years old, we have a 1 in 4 chance of having a problem with substances. However, if we wait until we're over the age of 21, that risk is reduced to 1 in 25. So pretty dramatic change in that, delaying that onset of use. Really, really pretty impactful. And I like to think of the brain as wet cement. It's super malleable. It's very vulnerable to things that make us feel good when we're kids. We would hope that would be something healthy, like getting outside, having fun activities, and that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, a lot of kids are really intrigued by substances that we'll be talking about. But we know that they're especially vulnerable because of that neuroplasticity of the brain. And that prefrontal cortex, the executive function of the brain, is not fully developed in any of us until we're roughly 25 years old. And so that's a lot of years to have some vulnerability around substance use. So we really want to delay that onset of use. Even with that in mind, why is it that some people develop a problem with substances and others don't? Why did my son have a problem with it and some other young person who was experimenting didn't have a problem with it later in life? Well, there's some different factors, and kind of one of the biggest ones is genetics. So if we look at the family tree, and if we can see that there's been some alcohol use, some substance use disorder, some gambling addictions, anything that's like a maladaptive behavior like that, that's no longer manageable, that if that's in the family history, we want to make sure that we're aware, and even that our children are aware, that they are at greater risk than someone who doesn't have that kind of family history. So it accounts for 40 to 60% of that risk. Psychosocial emotional factors, such as having a mental health challenge like depression or anxiety or ADHD. These folks are at a greater risk of misusing substances, whether it's trying to self-medicate or not feeling great about taking medicine, so they're trying something else. Also, trauma can be a piece of this too. So if our young people have had traumatic experiences that we may not even be aware of, something they got bullied in school. Trauma is different for everybody. And a traumatic event does not always mean that somebody has PTSD, but certainly some of these can really lend themselves to creating that desire to feel less. That's what the substance use comes into play. The environment is another leg of our risk factors. And so that would mean the access to substances in the home, in the community, in the friend group, and so on. And again, all of this is exacerbated by that age of the onset of use. So delay as much as possible, as long as possible. So our topic is about clearing the air about vaping, right? So it's about vaping, but vaping is a device, so we're going to talk about some of the substances that you can vape. So we'll start with nicotine, which is kind of how it got started. And it was originally introduced as harm reduction. So this was meant to be for people who have been smoking those combustible tobacco cigarettes that want to stop. And so e-cigarettes came along as an alternative to that was considered harm reduction or less harmful because it doesn't have tobacco, but it does have nicotine. And nicotine is one of our most addictive substances. If anybody has ever been a smoker or a vape or somebody who vapes, you know that it is very hard to stop using nicotine once it's been kind of ingrained in us and we've been using it and we now have a dependence on it. And by the way, I also wanted to mention that a lot of times parents will ask me what the trends are. And so there's something called the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, which may be available to Great Valley families, but I like looking at national statistics too, because it kind of gives us a broader view of what's happening in our culture. And this Monitoring the Future survey is really fantastic. And it's conducted every year with 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And just wanted to point this out, that if you look at over time, like our organization started off in 2011. My son got sober in 2010. So vaping wasn't a thing when my son got sober and when we started talking to families about substance use. So they added nicotine vaping to this national survey in 2017, as well as vaping cannabis, vaping other flavorings, or medical marijuana. All of those were introduced in 2017. And in 2023, they added Delta 8 and nicotine pouches. And I'll definitely be talking more about that in this presentation because they're really important to learn about. And at the end of this presentation, I will share with you a link to the really cool app that they have, or landing page that they have for Monitoring the Future, to see all of those trends. So if you're curious, that's a great way for you to take a look to see alcohol use, cannabis use, nicotine, whatever it is. There are all sorts of really great details there. And the reason that adolescents like nicotine is why most people like nicotine. There's a little bit of a buzz that you get. So it's a stimulant. And so when you're smoking or vaping, it is rapidly hitting the bloodstream, which is going right to the brain. And so we get this little dopamine hit. So even though it's a stimulant, which you would think would make you more anxious, it's actually making you just feel better because you have that dopamine hit, that feel good receptor in our brains. And so, taking a little break, forgetting about the fight that I just had with my friend, that just sort of starts to feel good. And then the more you do it, the more you need it. And then if you get in trouble because they caught you with a vape, now it's been taken away from you. And if you can't use some nicotine delivery system, you're going to start feeling really anxious because you're addicted to nicotine. And so you want that feeling back. And so this is why that kind of perpetuates that feeling that I really need to do this because look how anxious I am now without it. Well, it's because you're addicted to nicotine, and that's why you want to have that feeling quite frequently. And the feeling that you get is pretty fleeting. It doesn't last long. It's that's why there's such frequent dosing. And it used to be with tobacco cigarettes that you knew how many cigarettes you smoked a day because you counted them. There were 20 cigarettes in a pack and you knew how many you went through in a day, and you had to go somewhere to smoke it outside the building kind of thing. And you would have one cigarette and you'd go back inside. But now with these devices, you can kind of dose all day long. It's very discreet. Show more about that in just a little bit. But how are our kids getting them? Because you're supposed to be 21 years old anywhere in the country to get nicotine products. Well, they get them from a friend or relative. Sometimes it's an older sibling or a friend's older sibling. Vape shops and gas stations do carry them. They're supposed to ask for ID. They don't always. You can order these online. So you see this little image down here. You just go online and click that, yeah, I'm over 21 button, and you can order them there. So we like to advise family members too, if you're going to give your child a gift card, rather than a ubiquitous one like Visa or PayPal that can be used anywhere, because we never see an invoice for that. It's just a method of paying for something that doesn't come with a bill. So we also say, keep an eye out for those packages that might be coming. So rather than that kind of gift card, maybe think about their favorite store that doesn't have these kinds of products that are sold. And what's inside a vape pen? Well, and they look very all over the place. This is just kind of almost like an older one, but this is just one example. They can have any number of things inside. They've got potentially nicotine. That's where we got started with all of this, was nicotine, but you can also vape THC or CBD. And besides all of that, there are a whole lot of other things in these oils that are in e-cigarettes. The word vaping or a vape or vaporizer, whatever, is just such a misleading name, because when we think of vapor, it's like this is what comes when we're boiling water. That's water vapor. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about chemicals. We're talking about aerosols. And so you can see some of the really pretty serious chemicals that are in these products, and the flavors that are in them they'll sort of tout sometimes that, oh, these are FDA approved flavors. Well, they're approved for food consumption. They're meant to go into different foods as added flavoring, but they're not approved for going into our lungs. Nothing has ever been that great for, all of these metals and different things that you can see listed here should not be in our lungs. And so we just don't know either the long-term effects. As I said, these devices have not been around that long, really 15 years at the most, really more like 8 to 10 years ago is when they started getting really popular. So we just don't know the long-term effects that this might have. Is it safer than tobacco cigarettes? Possibly, but we just don't know what other fallout there might be from this. And, just as a comparison, I think this is, by the way, Stanford Medicine has this terrific Reach Lab that has great resources on it. And we have a link to that in that follow-up page that I mentioned so that you can find a lot of this there. But, here we have our old-fashioned tobacco cigarettes. So 20 cigarettes in a pack. And that's roughly 22 milligrams of nicotine total in that pack. But as you can see, this is Juul, a Juul pen. So Juul products were extremely popular about 5 to 8 years ago. They were dominating the market. That was pretty much what you got. They got in a lot of trouble because their flavorings were very alluring to young people, like mango and strawberry and mint and all of that. And so the federal government passed some legislation that restricted them from adding flavorings. So Juul really kind of got clobbered, and now they're back out there, but not nearly as robust as they used to be. But one Juul pod is about the equivalent of 37 cigarettes. Now, if you look at Vuse is a very popular device. That's equivalent to 82 cigarettes. And then you've got the Elf bar. These are extremely popular, and I'll show you some more images of those in a moment. But you can see that they're the equivalent of 590 cigarettes. The nicotine in these are nicotine salts in all of these liquid vaporizers, and they're much higher potency. So you're going from 22 milligrams of nicotine to 650 milligrams of nicotine. Now, hopefully somebody's not going through an entire Elf bar in one day, but we have heard young people say that they're going through a couple of them a week, and that's disconcerting. That's a lot of nicotine, and they're getting really heavily addicted very quickly. And you can see that what happened with these flavorings was, yes, they were out of Juul products now, but there was a loophole in the legislation that allowed for disposable products. That's why we have all of these different kinds of e-cigarettes that you'll see in a moment, but you can buy these e-juices separately. So even if you have something that has a refillable container inside the e-cigarette, you can add these flavorings. That's why sometimes you smell something funky. Well, it doesn't smell like tobacco, certainly, and it doesn't smell like cannabis. What does that smell? Well, they're adding these e-juice flavorings to it that are available online. And this is one of those disposable cigarettes I was talking about, Lucy sticks. And you can see this almost looks like a candy display. So I'm pretty sure pink lemonade is not being marketed to people my age. These are definitely being targeting our young people. And these are some of the other products. These are those Elf bars that I mentioned with lots and lots and lots of nicotine. Some of these devices look like highlighter pens. Some of them actually look like inhalers. So we also have seen this happening, and the sweatshirts are really expensive. We were looking into these. We couldn't believe this was a real thing. We looked it up. It is a real thing, but they're pretty pricey. And we were doing this presentation somewhere in person, and a parent came up to me after and she said, "Oh, my daughter made her own one of these. She put flexible tubing through her hoodie and hooked it up to her vape pen that was hidden inside the sweatshirt, and she could just vape very discreetly that way." And they kind of exhale. They'll sort of tuck open the shirt and then exhale into their shirt. So it's not smoke. It's an aerosol that just kind of disappears. So you just don't see it. You might smell something funny, but you don't see it. And now this is really becoming so popular with young people, and it's really an area of concern. So Zyn is a mint flavored nicotine pouch. So you can see it's this kind of soft pouch that goes along the gum line, and it's delivering nicotine through the bloodstream that way. Again, this is a relatively new phenomenon. We don't know the long-term effects. Of course, for a long time, we've had smokeless tobacco like Skoal and those kinds of products that also are nicotine and go along the gum line, but they also are tobacco. This is not tobacco, so we're hoping it's not as problematic with causing gum cancer, mouth cancer, tongue cancer, that sort of thing. But again, this is really new. So we just don't know. It's the popularity is new. I think they've been around for a few years now, but they've become extremely popular. And we're even hearing of kids really packing more like multiple pouches in their mouths at one time. So they're getting an awful lot of nicotine. And unfortunately, we know that if kids are using e-cigarettes to deliver nicotine, they're 3.5 times more likely to start using cannabis. And so we're going to talk about cannabis now, because that has introduced, the e-cigarettes have introduced a lot of young people to cannabis who weren't using the dried flower, the rolling a joint, packing a bowl, that kind of stuff. This is a very new phenomenon, like in the past 8 to 10 years kind of thing that has been growing. But I want to back up and just kind of tell you a little bit more about cannabis. It is a fascinating plant. It's been around for a very long time, and it has hundreds of molecules in it that present differently. The two that we're most interested in, that you hear the most about, are THC and CBD. So CBD does not get you high, right? This is something that has a lot of potential for being medicinal. We know that there are some FDA-approved medications that come from CBD that help with childhood seizures, such as Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. That would be Epidiolex, which is an FDA-approved medicine that comes from primarily CBD out of the cannabis plant. There are some traces of THC, but the children who have this seizure disorders are not smoking it. It's an oil, so it's not something that they're vaping. But I just wanted to point that out. The THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, that is the psychoactive ingredient. So that's what we're usually talking about when we're talking about marijuana, weed, pot, getting high, that kind of stuff. That's the THC. And it's delta-9 that has been historically what we've talked about. It can present in a lot of different ways depending on a few things, largely depending on the strain. So generally there's sativa, there's indica, there's some hybrids, but sativa is going to be a bit more euphoric feeling. Indica is going to be a bit more sedating, but depending on the person who's using it as well, they can respond to it in very different ways depending on their own body chemistry, what's going on in their brain. Based on all of these different factors, including those strains, it can present as a stimulant, as a depressant, as a hallucinogen. So we're sort of seeing, it's very hard to say what are the signs because it can show up very differently for folks. Problems that we're seeing are definitely that short-term memory that I think most people are aware of. Being amotivated and apathetic is not great when somebody is using a lot of cannabis, which is this sort of cycle that happens. So, maybe they were already feeling, a bit socially anxious or awkward. They found that this made them feel better, and now they're just kind of isolating. And we hear this very, very often from family members that their child who's been using THC products for a while are now just kind of in the game room or in their bedroom and really not wanting to get out and socialize in real life. And it's a concern because we want them to be learning all those social skills right now. And we want them to seek help if they're struggling with this, which they're not really motivated to do because the cannabis is reducing their motivation. So problem solving, other mental health challenges, which I'll talk more about in a bit. Definitely potency is a big concern. And I'm definitely going to talk more about all of that and edibles as well. So this shows you kind of the green section and the orange section are kind of the different areas of cannabis that we're talking about today. So in that green section, you see that dried plant on the left. That's the dry flower. That is kind of what we think of historically as what weed looks like, right? So it's the dried flower, it gets ground up a bit, and you put it into a joint or a bowl or a bong or something like that for smoking. The THC levels, again, that's the psychoactive ingredient, were so low all through the 60s through the 90s, as much as 3%, maybe 5%, if it was really quote unquote good stuff, right? The average today through hybridization, through, the magic of botany, has increased that potency to an average of 13% and at the very highest 36%. So far, 36% THC is the highest the dried plant has gotten. But usually we see like around 13, maybe 15% THC is more like the average. And that's a lot higher already than it used to be. But now when we talk about concentrates, this is a game changer. This is an entirely different substance because we know that we can get cannabis products that are up to, I really need to update this, it's up to like 98, 99% THC. It's as high as they can get it to go, right? Through, and the way they do it is they put the dried plant in like say a tube or something like that. They strip it with a solvent like butane. So the butane is like taking the THC off of the plant and concentrating it. It's stripping the plant of the THC, concentrating it into these oils and things. And I'll show you some images in a moment of what that might look like. But this cartridge is one example. So this is some oil, and they call them carts. And they have this threading system that's kind of universal, and it just threads onto the portion of the e-cigarette that is the battery that heats it up and then allows you to vape that. So the reason we have this note about edibles presenting their own set of problems is when you smoke a THC product, you're immediately feeling that buzz because it's going right into the bloodstream and right into the brain. So you feel high very quickly. If you're consuming a THC edible, it's going through the digestive system, so it takes longer to feel it. So what happens a lot of times is whoever is eating this in order to get high, they're saying, oh, like I'm not really feeling this. I've eaten 2 gummies and I'm not even feeling it. So they'll eat some more. Now, by the time it kicks in, they're feeling quite sick. They might be toxic now. So that's one problem. Another problem is so many of these edibles look like candy, or it's cookies or it's something else. I mean, in Pennsylvania, we do not have Delta 9 edibles available, but in states, did I say country? In Pennsylvania, we don't have Delta 9 products that are edible, but in other states, we know that our kids are getting them from friends when they travel, or they're ordering some things, or they're going over to New Jersey or something like that. And those edibles do have Delta 9 in them. And the emergency departments of those states are reporting high incidence of young kids not intending to get high, thinking it was a cookie or a candy or something like that, and eating it and getting really sick. So lots of problems around edibles. The hemp plant is really interesting. Hemp is a variety of cannabis. What's interesting about it is there are a lot of benefits to having hemp. So making rope, it makes concrete stronger for construction and things like that. And so the agricultural industry said to the federal government, being that cannabis is federally illegal, they said, well, we want to be able to grow hemp for these other reasons. And they said, okay, we hear you. So they have this farm bill that was passed that said that you can grow hemp, which is defined as having less than 0.3% THC. So in other words, not nearly as potent. It's not something that we have to worry about. So they thought, so this farm bill was passed and farmers are now allowed to grow hemp legally. The problem is the cannabis industry figured out a way to concentrate that hemp plant so that they now, if you have driven past a vape shop here in Pennsylvania at all, you've seen signs, I'm sure, that say, we have CBD, Delta 8, and Kratom. And I'll talk more about Kratom in a moment. And then when they're talking about Delta 8, that's what we're talking about. It's coming from the hemp plant. Will you get as high on Delta 8 as you would on Delta 9? No, probably not, but you'll get high. You can order, and Delta 10, by the way, is also derived from the hemp plant, but it's not nearly as popular. It's mostly Delta 8 that we're seeing. And not only can you get Delta 8 here in Pennsylvania in vape shops or gas stations, if you're over 21 and if they're carding, you can also get them online. You can, again, click that box that says, yes, I'm over 21, and you can order Delta 8 products online. And these come in oils, as you see here. It also comes in gummies and other edibles as well. Kratom is not vaped. It is not cannabis or part of the cannabis family. The reason I have it here is because it's been coming up a lot in our talks with family members who are saying, like, my kids love this Kratom stuff. Kratom is a sedative. It comes from Thailand and Indonesia, Southeast Asia. And so it's often mixed into hot beverages like a tea or something like that. You can also buy it in capsule form. These are fully legal. There's no age limit on these. And so this is why young people are very interested in it and are trying it out. It's still kind of controversial. We just don't think it's a great idea for a young person to be using something that is sedating, so we just don't know enough about if there's any potential benefit. It certainly isn't medicine. It's just something that's easily accessible, and it gives them a different feeling that they might like. But we really want to be cautious about introducing something that we just don't know very much about yet. So back to cannabis, these are all concentrates of THC. So you can see the different forms that it comes in, oils and waxes and shatter and these crystals on the top right that just pretty amazing that came from this plant. So it really, really has transformed in the last 10 years or so. And what really is frustrating is that the cannabis industry is following the marketing role of 80-20, which this has been around for a long time. This is utilized through alcohol industry, tobacco industry, fast food, processed foods. All of those industries know that 80% of their product is being consumed by 20% of their patrons, of their business. So they want to go after that 20% of folks who are going to use 80% of their product. And they know the science. They know that young people are vulnerable to becoming addicted to these things, and that's who they're targeting. As you can see in all of these advertisings and all of these products that are sold, I mean, these Cannaburst gummies look just like Starburst. This is Delta 8 gummies. You can just see that it's, and all the Delta, the edibles that are down here, they just are targeting our kids, and it's not fair. And I think that is actually, we'll talk more about ways to talk with our children, but I do think that this is one way that we can really impress upon them, like, you don't want to be manipulated. I know you don't. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to manipulate you to buy this stuff. So let's hope that they can see past that. And unfortunately, it's pretty easy to get to some of this stuff. So you can go onto YouTube and learn how to make your own edibles. They give you a little, I just did this screenshot from something on YouTube where they give the formula for how to put all this together. You can buy these molds for making your own gummies on Amazon. So this is really the Wild West. People are making this at home and kind of doing their own thing. The way those vape devices have changed that I was showing you with nicotine, this is a new thing that is like, if anybody remembers Tamagotchi games, where you had to feed your little Tamagotchi, your little tech pet kind of thing. Well, you can order these things online now that are vapes that it could be nicotine, but a lot of people are like kind of putting the THC oils in them. But again, you can order these online and check a box that says, yes, I'm over 21. And you actually have to vape. You have to hit it in order to play the game, in order to feed your little Tamagotchi character or whatever that looks like. So playing games, all that requires the users to vape. So, this is just clearly marketing to a young person, which we want to make sure all of you are aware of. So we were looking at monitoring the future earlier. This is another independent study they did independent of that other survey, where they asked 12th graders, and this is just through 2022, but they asked 12th graders, in the past 30 days, have you used high potency THC products? And by definition, it's 39 to 95% THC. In the concentrates and in the butane concentrates, more than 90% THC, and up to 15% 3 years ago had used these high potency products among 12th graders. So, again, we really want to be thoughtful about thinking this is just weed, because those high potencies are not what we're used to. I know we're mostly focused on under 18-year-olds here, but this is coming from, again, the National Institute of Health, which is what drives that Monitoring the Future survey. But this is looking at 19 to 30-year-olds. And the reason I bring this up is, we're preparing our 18-year-olds to become young adults. And so it's just interesting to see that over the past, this was just looking at a 10-year period, that cannabis use has definitely increased hallucinogen use as well, but for tonight's purposes, we're focusing on marijuana or cannabis, and you can see that that's increased by about 13% so far. So a lot of myths around cannabis, and one of them is that, oh, it's not addictive. Well, it absolutely can be. Not everyone is going to become addicted, certainly, but about 3 in 10 of us might become addicted to it. And this actually goes up pretty dramatically, 4 to 7 times if we start using when we're a young person. So same kind of thing plays out with alcohol and other substances as it does with cannabis, but absolutely can become addicted, and definitely not everyone will, but we want to know that there are risks out there. Another myth is that there are no withdrawal symptoms with cannabis, and in fact there are. If you've been using regularly, if you've been using pretty frequently and higher potency, then you're most likely going to see some withdrawal. And all of these symptoms that you're seeing can last up to 2 weeks. Cannabis stays in the system a very long time. So the withdrawal might last 2 weeks, but the effect, if somebody is being tested, whether a urine test or a blood test to see if they have THC in their system, that can actually be in the system for up to 2 months or even longer. I've heard some of our inpatient providers tell us that when they're testing their patients months out from their abstinence, that they are still testing positive for THC months later. So it's fat soluble, it stays in the body a good long time. And so there definitely are some long-term effects, not only that lasting in the bloodstream, but these withdrawal symptoms are pretty nasty. They can be really, really uncomfortable. And what can happen if you have too much is that there can be an overdose. This is another myth that, well, you don't overdose on it. Well, people equate overdosing with death quite often. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about having too much. You can overdose on caffeine, you can overdose on alcohol, and you can overdose on cannabis by having too much. Does not necessarily mean you're going to die. It just means you're going to be very sick, and you can have any of these a number of symptoms when that happens. And one that I'll talk about is a really bizarre phenomenon called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. Hyperemesis basically means cyclical vomiting. But cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is something that is relatively new to the medical field. Cedars-Sinai is where I got this information, but also Cleveland Clinic is researching this and trying to understand it, because it's really contrary to what we've always known about THC or marijuana, weed, is that you get the munchies, right? It increases your appetite. In fact, there are even medications like Marinol that come from the cannabis plant that are used for people who are have no appetite because they're undergoing cancer treatment and have chemotherapy that is destroying their appetite. And the Marinol, which is a cannabis product, increases their appetite. And we know that, again, you get high, you get the giggles and the munchies. Well, this is a very contrary thing where they're incredibly nauseated and they start vomiting uncontrollably, and they're having really intense abdominal pain with it. In fact, people call it scromiting, which means screaming and vomiting, because they are in so much pain as this is happening. And they're vomiting so much that they might become dehydrated, they might have a seizure, and they almost instinctively know as this is happening to take a hot shower or hot bath, which mitigates the symptoms. Again, we don't know why, but we have talked to a number of people from emergency departments who've said, not only are we seeing lots of cases of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, but we're seeing scalding on people because they're in so much agony that they're burning themselves trying to get a hot shower to make it stop happening. So they've actually started using, in the emergency departments and things, capsaicin cream, which is an ointment that has some heating elements to it, so that you would use it on sore joints and muscle aches and things like that. And so when it's applied to the abdomen, it actually does quiet down the vomiting for some people. So again, very strange phenomenon, but if you're seeing a lot of cyclical vomiting, potentially this could be a problem. I would urge people, if they're seeing a healthcare professional, if there's cannabis use that's accompanying this vomiting, it's really important to point that out. Hopefully the medical profession is getting clued into this because it's a really new thing. So let's talk a little bit about medical marijuana. We often have a lot of questions around this, so I wanted to sort of preemptively address it. Here in Pennsylvania, we do have legalized medical marijuana. We do not have adult use or recreational use cannabis legalized yet, but we do have medical marijuana for a number of years now. We have a bunch of different dispensaries, and I'm not trying to disparage any of this, but I just want to make it clear that this is calling this medicine is a bit of a misnomer because there is no prescription for these products. You can apply for a medical marijuana card. The state of Pennsylvania has 24 medical conditions that would qualify someone for a medical marijuana card. And you might go onto one of those dispensaries' websites and you get a pop-up almost immediately often that says, do you need a card? You can meet with our physician. They can do telemedicine and meet with you. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. They ask you which of these conditions you have. They ask whatever questions they ask, and then they will or will not approve you for a medical marijuana card. Then you pay the state of Pennsylvania something. They send you the card. The card, once you get it, does not say what condition you have. It's just a card that says you can go in a dispensary. Of these 24 conditions, the 3 that are most often cited as the condition that they want to get a card for are anxiety disorders, intractable neuropathic pain, or post-traumatic stress disorder. By far, that number 1 anxiety disorder is number 1, like by far, like that is by the vast majority of people requesting a medical marijuana card are citing anxiety as the reason that they want it. When they go to the dispensary with a card, they talk to a bud tender who's working there or someone else who's, they're occasionally pharmacists in the store, but they're not required to be any longer. There has to be a pharmacist or medical professional affiliated with each store, but they don't have to necessarily be on site. So they're talking to somebody who's not had a whole lot of training to determine which of the myriad strains of medical marijuana there are that might be a good fit for them. And you can go on these sites and see they're called Pineapple Express and Purple Haze and Diesel Fuel and all this kind of stuff. And they have different levels of potency, and they're all shown on their menus on their websites if you're curious. And I just want to point out that the medical societies affiliated with many of these conditions that are cited as being applicable for a medical marijuana card these medical societies are not endorsing these products. That's what I was getting to. They're not endorsing these products. And so again, not truly medicine. If you are getting medicine from a pharmacy that goes into the Pennsylvania prescription drug monitoring program, PDMP, prescription drug monitoring program. These products do not go into that system. We're not seeing anything about contraindication with other medications that someone might be on. So it's really not monitored. It's really not, and the physicians are not following up to see how's that Pineapple Express working for you. You know, it's more about the dispensary at that point. And actually what we're seeing, which is very concerning, is if somebody has either a family history of some of these very serious mental health conditions, or if they have some of the traits already being identified, cannabis is now being shown to not only be used in correlation with those risks, but is really being causing some of these traits to accelerate, to show up. So it's acting almost as a catalyst for psychosis, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and so forth. So if somebody has that risk as a family history or in their own milieu at the moment, this could actually make things worse. It's very, very disconcerting as well. So that is a lot of really heavy information. And so I want you to know that if you joined us after I opened, I did mention that I have a son who has been through a lot of this. He's thankfully been in recovery many, many years now. But I went through so much of this fear that comes with this. So I know that what I just shared is not easy for us to consume. But this is kind of what I looked like. I was freaking out. My hair was on fire. I was desperately trying to get my son to stop doing this stuff. And I would lecture, lecture, lecture. I even lectured him when he was high one time, which was not effective. And I wish I knew this acronym then, which is WAIT, which stands for why am I talking? You know, I have a lot of things I'm afraid of right now, but I don't have a lot of information. And me talking to my son who's under the influence was not effective and was not good for either of us. And I was just scared and I wanted to shut it down and I wanted to scare him or stop him or whatever. And it just wasn't effective. So I just want to share some kind of guidelines that I think can be very helpful. You know, we can talk about social norms, which means basically there's this disconnect. There's what young people think, and then there's reality. And what we often hear young people say is, well, everybody does this. Everybody smokes weed. It's not just me, or everybody drinks or whatever it is. Well, that's actually not true. You know, that's absolutely not true. We know from, again, that Pennsylvania Youth Survey, Monitoring the Future. You might say like, well, kids lie on that. There are mechanisms within those surveys that identify when a young person is not being truthful on the surveys. We look at the trends there, and we know that it's not absolutely everybody who's doing this. So we can dispel that myth. If our young person wants to avoid these substances but feels pressured because they're going to, I remember this. My daughter was in the marching band and she was going to a band party and there was a lot of drinking going on then. And she's actually somebody who doesn't want to drink, you know? And so she, I might have done, I didn't do this with her then because I didn't know what I'm telling you about now. I wish I knew it then, but we could have role played that and said and if she didn't feel comfortable doing this with me, she could have done it with one of her friends who she felt had her back and they were on the same page. So just kind of acting out like, okay, hey, how about having a shot of vodka, or how about trying my vape, and like saying what it's like to say no thanks, and then getting pressured to. And I love what we actually had a young person tell us that this happened to him. Somebody was pressuring him to drink at a party, and he finally said to the guy who was pressuring him, like, "Why do you care if I drink? Why is it so important to you?" And that shut him up, which was a great idea. So we can kind of role play that with our kids, which is experiential learning. That's a way to kind of build some of these skills. We could talk a little bit more about motivational interviewing if you're interested. It's kind of asking open-ended questions and that sort of thing, and validating what they say. Not being judgmental. We don't want to sensationalize at all. We don't want to say, "Oh, it's the devil's botany. You got to stay away from it," because they're not going to listen if they have a different belief system than we might. And it just said that thing about being judgmental. Please, let's not demonize someone we know who is struggling with substance use. So if it's somebody in the family, if it's a neighbor, anything like that, if we're just kind of using judgmental language about that person and saying that they're not a good person or whatever, how likely is our child to come to us to say, my older sibling is doing this, or I'm curious, I might want to try it myself, or whatever. They're going to have this belief that we can't hear that, because we have this bias, we have this opinion about it, and that we're not going to be open to hearing about it. We want them to talk to us. So if there's, let's say, a niece or a nephew who's struggling, we might say, boy, I really hope that so-and-so is getting the help and support that they need, because it seems pretty clear that they're struggling. And so we just want to be careful about the kind of language that we use around that, because we want them to be honest with us. And we can't scare kids. There have been so many efforts over the years to have the crashed car out in front of the school and the assembly with the drunk driver that did something absolutely devastating. And we cannot scare young people. There's so much research behind this that says it's not effective, because they just don't believe it would happen to them, or that they would make that mistake. So we might be afraid, but we can't scare them out of doing this. And then finally, in closing, I kind of want to just talk about us family members, So again, I have, let's this child who, when he was much younger, was struggling with substances, and he's represented on the left there, and his dad and I are on the right with all of our feelings. And my son's not feeling a whole lot because he was using a lot of drugs and alcohol. But we were over here really in crisis. And so I really want to encourage family members to get some support for themselves. You know, we are very fortunate that we have telemedicine. Telehealth is an option these days, ever since COVID came along and pushed us all here on Zoom. And so there's so many options for getting support for us, not just for our children, but for us. And if we're not on the same page as the other parent, I love this idea of talking to somebody together to take that pressure off of ourselves of trying to convince the other one that this is a problem or isn't a problem. It really helps to have that objective, professional perspective to help with that. And I know that Great Valley has some terrific resources for referring our children to get some support. They have a student assistance program. They can absolutely refer to some supports for our kids, but this is just my little PSA for get help for yourselves too, please. And our organization, be a part of the conversation, has a couple of free services for family members. Parent partnership meetings are taking place 5 days a week. We have 21 meetings every week. Half of those are online and half are in person. They saved me. They absolutely saved me to be with my peers who understood what I was going through as a parent, and just encourage you to check them out. You can find them on our website. I'll put that link in the chat. And we also have something called the Family Recovery Course, which is a 3-part course for family members whose child is struggling with substance use. That's is not prevention. This is absolutely a challenge with substances. And I told you that I would take a look at this website with you, which I'll do in just a moment. On our follow-up page, which again, I'll put all these links in the chat. We have all of these links in there for how to get help from for quitting vaping, whether it's tobacco, whether it's cannabis, and so on. But these are mostly nicotine cessation sites. These are, you don't have to screenshot these if you don't want to, or use the QR code, but I'll put the links in the chat. But those are available to you, and that's what I have. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to show you the website that I was just talking about. If you're curious to know about trends, just give me 1 second. Okay, so this is that monitoring the future that I told you about, and it's really got this cool thing. So you can look at, you can pick your substance here. They've got it all. I challenge you to not find a substance on this drop-down menu. So like we've got alcohol in here right now, and you can look at, it defaults to 12 months, but you can look at daily use, which is going to be a lot lower. You can look at lifetime use, which is going to be a lot higher. That means that they have tried it. Look how much alcohol has come down over the years. That's amazing. So these are where are they? Here we are, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders over a lifetime. So great to see these numbers coming down. And let's just take a look and see about marijuana. Here we go. So lifetime use, it's been pretty steady. I mean, it has come down a bit in recent years. So that's a good thing, but that's 12 months. Here's lifetime. Yeah, so it's coming down a bit. But anyway, you can take a closer look at this on your own. I will put that in the chat as well. So I would love to hear from you. Oh, I see something in the chat. Yay. Let's see. No matter what the use, recreational or medicinal, marijuana proponents still insist it is safe. These teens hear that on social media. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. They also hear it from their parents sometimes. I think there's still the belief that this is that old school weed, that this is the Cheech and Chong era, and it's no longer that. We've kind of way past that. So that's why these kinds of programs, obviously I feel they're important because there are programs, but they're really important. It's so important for people to understand this isn't even my son's weed. This is a very, very, very different product. I wish we could help people understand that. And being that it's called medical marijuana, I think that adds to that belief that this is healthful and healthy and helpful. And I don't want to make any judgments about people who are able to use cannabis as adults. You know, if you're over 21, better yet 25, you know, when you've got that fully myelinated frontal lobe and you're able to consume some cannabis recreationally and you're doing it somewhere where it's legal, you know, more power to you. It's like, well, certainly not going to judge somebody who's doing that or drinking or whatever. We just want to be careful about in front of our kids the way we're presenting it. You know, like we wouldn't want to say, "Oh, I've had such a horrible day. I'm going to grab a beer." You know, like that's not the language we want to use in front of our children. And the same goes for a psychoactive substance like cannabis. You know, we want to make sure that we're modeling healthy choices and making it really clear that this is not for a young person. Please feel free to unmute and ask a question.
But first, just a comment. This was, I don't know if the attendees appreciate, but I can comment how informative and objective your information is. I actually tune in because I like to see what's out there. I do research on cannabis. First, I'm for marijuana use if you're over 25. I grew up in Oregon. Fabulous. So if they have questions, I'm sure you can point them in the right direction. One thing I want to comment, though, is driving. That's what I meant by right now I see in the state of Pennsylvania, the medicinal users are trying to have more luxury of driving while they have it in their system. These are all things that send messages to the teens that it's safe to drive. I have been involved, sadly, with cases where a teen sincerely thought it was safe to drive because that's what they heard, that's what the media says, and then they killed somebody. So again, these kids are going to experiment, but I think they need objective information. The other thing our lab is finding is the relationships to schizophrenia in early users. So again, waiting till you're 25, till your brain is developed. As a matter of fact, the same reason it's bad for the developing brain, it may actually be good for the degenerating brain, an older adult. Again, thank you for this presentation.
Thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate that. And thanks for sharing what you shared because, and it is really a worry about the schizophrenia and all the things that are coming up. Not something that anybody anticipated. Thank you very much for that. Thanks. So I see a comment. My daughter's eating disorder therapist seems to think pot is okay if you have a joint a day. There's it's not just young people who think this is harmless, and it's certainly not just some adults, even professionals out there. We had a program one time with a young woman who was maybe 19 or 20 years old and had a couple of years in recovery from substance use disorder. And she shared a story that she was seeing a new therapist, and she shared her history with substance use, and she shared that she had a lot of anxiety. She didn't really necessarily relate it to her substance use, but she said she was currently experiencing a lot of anxiety. And this therapist said, "Have you thought about medical marijuana?" And she already disclosed that she had a history of cannabis use or of substance use disorder. So making this young woman very vulnerable to having a problem with it. So buyer beware, you know, it's really up to us to advocate for ourselves and to understand this. And you know, how many times have you heard stories about different kinds of medical conditions where the patient is doing a lot of the research and learning, you know, we're not going to self-diagnose and we're not going to self-treat, but we at least need to learn and understand, like, no, that is not advisable. So that's really, I'm sorry to hear that. And how do you then talk to your daughter, right? When, well, the professional said this is what I should do. It's very challenging. And I'll quickly share a story about my son's, my God, love my son for letting me talk about his drug use so much. But when he was still using, and we knew just like a fraction of how much he was using. And we took him to see our daughter's therapist, who was a mood and anxiety disorder specialist. And we thought, well, we weren't really ready to decide that Daniel had an addiction. Like, we were still in denial, frankly. But we took him to see her. He agreed to go. He met with her. His dad and I were in the waiting room. And at the end of their session, the therapist brought us in, and our son gave her full permission to discuss everything with us in front of him. And she actually turned to his dad and me and she said, "Come on, didn't you guys get high in college?" So we were trying to circumvent this, and she was basically telling us we were overreacting in front of our son. So we thought we were crazy. We thought we were, being hypervigilant or something. And it was a missed opportunity because he lied to her. He told her just the bare minimum of what was actually going on because he wanted to keep using. He didn't want to stop. So he was masterful, and we took him to it's not her fault. I honestly don't blame her. We took him to the wrong therapist. And the point of the story is, I wish I had had the courage to say, let's take him to somebody who understands addiction, because they have a much better sense of if somebody is deflecting or saying, "Oh no, look over here," that kind of thing. We weren't ready to see it. But I realize now, if our child had any other symptoms that presented as something scary, I would take him to a specialist. And I didn't do that. And I'm sorry now that he had another year under his belt of substance use before we did this intervention. And finally, thank goodness, he agreed to stop. What would I say to the therapist? I guess I would say I would really encourage you to understand that, so she's an eating disorder specialist. I would say I found another eating disorder specialist, because I can put you in touch with folks who absolutely understand the risks around this. I don't mean to take away this person's business, but they really need to understand that this is not, I don't know if this is somebody who's local, but we work with some amazing folks who are in the disordered eating lane and understand substance use, because there's a huge correlation between things like anorexia and binge eating and other things that correlate a lot with substance use. And so it's a slippery slope. Is your daughter pretty bought into this therapist and feeling that this is validating, or does your daughter, I don't know if you want to answer that question. I'm just curious if your daughter is like, okay, like, then I want to do this. She loves her. Yeah, it's a challenge. Maybe we can talk offline. I'm going to put my contact info in the chat if you're interested in contacting me. She's young. Yep.
And if that's the direction somebody's interested in, you need to carefully select and screen and rescreen and screen a cannabis specialist. If they don't spend an hour or so with you in that type of case, they're in it for their fee. There are potentially, if it's the difference between her survival, that's a different question, totally different question. And microdosing, things like that, are a little different than actually just sitting there smoking a joint. And just a reminder, those products aren't all that healthy because they've got molds, etc. So even in the best of circumstances, you have to be careful about a product. And just for those of you that are listening, research needs to be done. CBD, you mentioned CBD. The animal and human studies show that causes glaucoma. So you're maybe gaining in one area, but losing in a completely different area. So those are the kind of things that you have to make a decision. Is the gain bigger than the harm?
Right. And liver function too can be impacted by CBD. So
yeah, but at least there's research on that. The company Epidiolex completely ignores the eye problem. It's a simple study to prove or disprove, but there's both an animal and a human study showing it does. So those children taking high doses, slowly going blind. Editorial comment there.
I appreciate that. I had no idea. Thank you for sharing that.
You just look it up again. You can look it up in the medical literature, but nobody ever wants to talk about it because that's an economic hit that they take. And again, I see a lot of value in cannabinoids to treat disease, even in younger people. For example, one of the dispensaries near me that opened medicinally, they closed as soon as recreational came out. They didn't want to deal with that. One of their first products were for people with cancer. You know, appealing food so that they could, you know, get a little more appetite. So they had really worked carefully with their medicines. But when the recreational market took over, they just closed because they just couldn't. Anyway, a lot of conversations there. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No. I appreciate that. And actually, I'm glad you brought up the research, because the truth is that there is no research on high potency THC being used recreationally. I mean,
Well, you know, I would say as a person doing that, first of all, we know from animal literature, high potency kills the cells that control your eye movement. So if you've been around somebody that's using high potency, they get these jiggly eye movements. That's actually probably a sign of the cells dying. So ethically and morally, some of this dabbing, I as a researcher wouldn't do it because of the harm. On the other hand, research in the United States is impossible. I do research, and we do what's called opportunistic dosing, where they use their own product and they get high on their own. We pick them up by Uber, Lyft, and bring them in. It's very bad research. On the other hand, we're not studying it as a medicine. We're studying impaired driving.
right.
So we don't know much, and the opportunities to know will be coming soon, but countries like Canada and Israel are actually doing a good job. But I wouldn't do human research with the high potency knowing it's killing cells.
Right. It's unethical, right? And so we just don't know longitudinally what's happening to people with this higher potency stuff, you know?
Yeah. And again, we could talk for hours on this. I was not aware that many teenagers were actually trying it, because even one use of it has killed some of their brain cells for the eye movement.
Yeah.
My opinion.
I appreciate it. Thank you. One question that was asked was, how do you know when smoking cannabis has become a problem or a substance use? Is it a substance use or becomes a substance use disorder? We have on that, actually, it's a different page. It's the cannabis page. I'll put that link in the chat. We have a copy of the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, conditions. I think it's 11, and not conditions, I'm sorry, symptoms of cannabis use disorder. So we can take a look at that. Another question that was asked in advance: what age is the best to begin speaking to children who have a genetic predisposition to addiction? It's a great question. I don't know if the person who asked is here, but I would like to just share something that we talk about when we have another program that's called Have You Had the Conversation? And that's for parents of K through 5 students. And what we talk about is, if there's a family history, you know, young people understand peanut allergies, because we all have to be careful about bringing things into school that might have nuts in them, because lots of kids are very seriously allergic to peanuts. So we can talk to our kids that are very young and say, you know how some of your friends have peanut allergies. Well, Aunt Lisa, let's say, for example, I always use Aunt Lisa, I don't know who she is, but let's say that Aunt Lisa is somebody who has struggled with alcohol use. Someone could say, you know how Aunt Lisa acts funny sometimes, because, by the way, our kids notice a lot more than we give them credit for. Well, Aunt Lisa kind of has an allergy to alcohol. When she has alcohol, she wants more. Her body's telling her, give me more. And then she gets kind of sick from it. So she has too much. And we might have that allergy too. So we have to be really careful the way we drink, or if we drink, And so we can talk about it pretty openly and invite questions, because as I said, they notice so much more, I think, than we give them credit for. But just to have those conversations, and again, to not be disparaging of Aunt Lisa. We want to say, like, gosh, we love Aunt Lisa. We want her to get better. So if you're ever worried about anybody who's having too much to drink, please talk to us. Even if it's mommy or daddy, talk to somebody that you trust about that, because we want them to feel comfortable talking. And if they tell us, if they come home smelling a little funky from school one day and they've taken off their coat and walked past you and you smell something, you're like, what's that smell? And like, well, I tried, Ryan's vape. And our first reaction might be to freak out like I did, right? With just getting really upset and all that. But instead to say, well, thank you for telling me the truth. I'm really glad you told me. I'm going to want to sit down and talk to you about this some more. I'm going to ask some questions. But I'm really, really glad you told me the truth. Thank you for that. So, because we want them to keep talking, we don't want to drive them underground. So they just get kind of better at keeping it under the radar, right? What would I do differently? I would have done that weight thing. Why am I talking? And then I would have taken a breath and I would have definitely talked to his dad so that we'd be on the same page and have a kind of plan for like what our expectations are, and then sit down and ask some questions, and not in a punitive or judgmental way, but just, especially once things escalated to him using pretty heavily. We had a lot of arguments. And what I wish I had done was said, help me. And we can even use body language like this, like not up here, but like you can't see my hands, but I have them in my lap, but just keeping our hands kind of open and inviting and saying like, help me to understand why you're so passionate about this. This is altering your mood and you really like that. So I'd love to know more about why you like that. If they don't want to talk to us about it, that's okay. We're going to find somebody that you can talk to, but we need to address it, because it's not okay. Like you're too young to be using this. We want to make it really clear that it's not okay with us, but we want to do it in a way that's respectful so that if he says, it helps me sleep, I love how it feels, I'm less socially anxious, or it's just not a big deal, we can use some of that. I mentioned motivational interviewing. We can use some of those kinds of things. I encourage you to look into motivational interviewing for family members. It's sort of, you can just sort of say, there's this acronym OARS: open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. So an open-ended question might be what I just said. Help me to understand why you're so passionate about this. Why do you like it so much? And then when they're answering, we might not like the answer, but we need to kind of keep it going. So we want to be respectful and say, okay, you're saying that it just really feels right to you, like, or it just feels like what you should be doing. And okay, I heard you say that in your view, everybody does this. I'd like to share some things that I learned with you, so that we can have a dialogue about it. If they're no longer interested in talking to you about this, which they may not be, it's probably something that we can't do on our own. We might need to bring in some help. So again, I wish if we got to that point where we couldn't even have a conversation about it, I wish I had looked into a therapist who understood substance use or addiction and said, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm blowing this out of proportion. I'd love for you to go to see this therapist. What could be wrong with seeing a therapist? You get to talk about yourself for 50 minutes, let's do that and let them help you, maybe think of some other ways. And even asking our kids, can you anticipate any problems with this? Is there anything that might not be a good thing about it? I've heard it's pretty expensive, which it is, is that a problem? How are you paying for this? So there are opportunities for them to see the other side and really think it through. It's not always going to be best for us to be the catalyst for that. It might need to be a professional who really and truly understands this. I'd contact your state officials or your state elected officials because recreational is on the table. You know, it comes up every election cycle, and it's not made it through yet, as you probably know. New Jersey has it, other surrounding New York definitely has it and going on, but we're not here to lobby or any of that kind of stuff. But I would, if you have concerns, I would absolutely contact your elected officials because, you know, when medical marijuana was legalized in PA, they were all shown this. Sanjay Gupta did a special years ago on CNN about this little girl named Charlotte who had Dravet syndrome. I think it was Dravet, or maybe it was Lennox-Gastaut. But she had an intractable seizure disorder, and she could really benefited from high levels of CBD in a cannabis plant. So the family actually moved to Colorado. They created a strain called Charlotte's Web in honor of her. This cannabis grower did, and so she was getting that. But that was before 2019, when the FDA approved Epidiolex, which we've talked about. But what the legislators were seeing were all of these lobbyists showing that poor little girl, and look how her life got so much better when she got that Charlotte's Web cannabis. So it is inhumane to not legalize this. And that's what they bought, you know, and that's why we have medical marijuana now, largely, not the only reason, but it was a big influence on people. It was seen as inhumane to not have something available legally that could help someone. Well, the percentage or the number of patients every year get medical marijuana for those kinds of seizure disorders is like a fraction of the people who are getting it for anxieties and things, because we have FDA approved medicine now for it. And so it just opened up this Pandora's box of this being seen as medicine and healthful. And so I don't know how many elected officials understand that. We have a recorded program on our YouTube channel called Taking the Lead. And we were very fortunate to have that speaker be, his name is Jonathan Culkins. He's out of Carnegie Mellon University. He's been on Freakonomics podcast. He's been all over the place. He's brilliant. And he talks a lot about policy. That is what we tried to get legislators to watch Taking the Lead. I'm going to try to really fast find it and send it to you, because I would love for more people to be aware. Thank you all so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.